Forbes Books presents The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani, highlighting the pioneers that reimagined possibilities and reimagined businesses. There are tons of fascinating verticals within the tech industry. You've got medtech, fintech, retail, health and wellness, just to name a few. And a lot of folks sort of stick to what they do best. But our guest this week made the jump from cosmetics to pharma. His name is Rajvir Madan, and he has over 20 years of digital transformation and innovation experience, and he's currently the SVP and Chief Digital and Information Technology Officer at Arcutis Biotherapeutics, a late-stage biopharmaceutical company. Gerry and Raj are going to talk about the importance of embedding data into every decision you make, the evolution of telemedicine, and how we can generate the future faster. Hello, Gerry. How are you?
Hey, Joe. I'm great. I'm back in New York City.
And you are racking up the frequent flyer miles as you promote your new book. Really excited about it. But today we got a special guest, someone who's made a very unusual shift. We haven't had a guest like this on the pod before, so super excited. His name is Rajvir Madan. He's a SVP at Arcutis Biotherapeutics, which, Raj, is such an interesting story I want to get into. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Joe. And Gerry, thanks for having me.
Yes, it's a very interesting story, and I bet he has a lot of things to talk about.
And now, so Raj, your shift from the cosmetic industry, you were in L'Oreal for many, many years, and then you moved on to pharmaceuticals. But from what I understand, this wasn't just something like you were looking for a big payday or it was a career thing. It was a very personal reason. Didn't your mother have something to do with this decision?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it started about 8 years ago. My mom, unfortunately, got diagnosed with brain cancer, and I was working at L'Oreal. That's where I actually met Gerry. I was spending a lot of time with him, and it started to become quite personal. And I sort of asked myself the question: am I going to be selling lipstick the rest of my life, or do I have a bigger purpose? And that's when I sort of decided to make a shift to the pharmaceuticals industry, and now I'm sort of in the biotech space. But one of the things that I sort of had realized was there's so much opportunity for me to drive change, so much opportunity for me to take my background from L'Oreal and start to apply some of those learnings in the pharmaceutical space, in the biotech space. And that's what got me really excited. But also as part of that, I started to define my purpose. I started to sort of think about what was important to me. And through a lot of introspection, by reflecting on my mom's condition, one of the big sort of aha moments that I had, and unfortunately she passed away about 5 years ago, was that there wasn't enough of a treatment out there for her condition, for her brain cancer. And that helped me define my purpose around generating the future faster, because I do believe that ultimately there is going to be a treatment out there for her condition that she had that unfortunately she passed away from. But if I could bring some of my innovation skills, some of my acceleration skills, digital transformation skills to the pharma industry, I feel that we have an opportunity to actually generate the future faster. So that's my personal purpose.
Generating the future faster, that's a good one. And now you understand why I invited Raj.
When I read up on you, Raj, and meeting you, I feel like you're the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz. You are this engineer with a heart, which is I don't know a lot of engineers, but this is not you're kind of an outlier in your space to have this engineer with this very culture driven sort of very mushy kind of esoteric kind of feel. Am I far off base here?
No, I think you got that right. I actually like that, an engineer with a heart. I'm going to use that tagline. Thanks, Joe.
So where does that come from, though? I mean, like you agree with me that most engineers are kind of very data driven, very much into their science, but the heart part of it doesn't get mixed in. How did that get into the alchemy here?
As I think about my role, as I think about sort of transforming the company I work for, transforming the industry that I work for, transformation is a hearts and minds game, to be quite honest. And, you could be sort of the smartest guy out there, but if you don't change people, you don't help them kind of understand the impact that this change is going to have, and you don't resonate with their heart, let's say, the change is never going to happen. So that's why I focus quite a bit on sort of culture. I focus quite a bit on people. I focus quite a bit on just making sure that it's not only about the technology, it's really about the impact that the technology is going to have on people. How is it going to help people lead better lives? How is it going to help people really make a difference with what they're doing on a day-to-day basis? So you always have to start with the people. You always have to be people-centric. And I think Einstein once said, he said, if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes actually thinking about the problem. And in the pharmaceutical space, in the biotech space, the problem starts by thinking about the patient, right? So if you don't understand the patient, you don't understand the people behind the drugs that you're producing, the topical creams that you're producing, you're never going to be successful. So I always believe you have to start there.
And so you said the word transform. So how does that mindset, how does that drive what we're here to talk about, digital transformation? How do you connect those dots?
So I think the way you connect those dots is, when I think about digital transformation, I start by thinking about this sort of obsession with the customer, the consumer, or the patient. And it always starts with really understanding, what does the patient need that they don't have today? What does the customer need that they don't have today? What does the consumer need that they don't have today? And it starts with talking to them. It starts by understanding what in sort of agile terminology is often called their pains, their gains, and their jobs to be done, right? So let's understand what's behind what they need, and then put the right technology solutions behind it. And that's sort of my recipe for transformation, which is start with understanding what they need, what they want, and then provide the right solutions for them.
And in today's world, I believe that you can bring very interesting setups. Technology can actually help to address those needs. Those, like you mentioned in one of our conversations, that all of these kind of remote work-ish kind of setups also work with the clinical testing that you are now doing, and overall how, like you saw it with the COVID, right? We were able to put together a vaccine in 9 months. Why? Because everybody has been kind of reimagining the entire paradigm about putting together a vaccine. And now we have the reality of being able to have a vaccine in 9 months instead of years and years and years. So that has been enabled by technology, understanding what your patients and your business needs, and then looking at technology in different ways so that you can address those problems.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Gerry, COVID has severely accelerated the digital transformation, and I think it's done that in two big ways. I think one is that if you look at it from an employer perspective, I think many of us are working remotely now, and that's because we've been able to adopt a lot of end user productivity tools. Your Zooms of the world, your Teams of the world, we're able to collaborate remotely. Something that we were able to do previously, but we were just not doing it. And I think COVID sort of forced us to do that. And then I think, to your point, COVID has also forced us to adopt a lot of digitally enabled business models, right? So in the pharmaceutical space, for instance, or in the biotech space, this notion of decentralized clinical trials did not even exist, right? So you had to go into a clinic to be part of to be part of a clinical trial. But now you can be part of certain trials from the comfort of your home, because someone can come to your home, collect a blood sample, or you could have a remote monitoring device that transmits vital data to a central sort of monitoring system, and you don't have to leave the comfort of your home. And what that's done is that's allowed patients that live 300 miles away from a clinical trial site to enroll in a clinical trial because they don't need to travel, right? So technology has really enabled that. I think the other thing, if you think of sales reps, for instance, right? So sales reps historically used to go into a doctor's office, and they used to visit a doctor's office and have a physical interaction. COVID changed that, right? So you can now do a virtual call with a doctor, for instance. You don't have to go in, and actually do a physical call with a doctor, and that's obviously improving the productivity of a lot of sales reps. Obviously, I think telemedicine has spiked during COVID, right? So so this whole notion of the consumerization of healthcare, where we don't necessarily want to go into a doctor's office. We want to do things much more remotely, especially for common conditions like the cold, the flu, or a fever, a headache, that kind of thing. We can do that much more remotely now, and I think COVID has also enabled that, let's say.
And the technology that comes like with wearables, like just think wearables, just think how you can measure the sugar level in your blood and all of these things that are basically remote sensors that can send data to some kind of a location. A doctor can look into it, and maybe they will call you, maybe they won't, based on the data they have. And this will enable you to have the same kind of treatment in the middle of New York or some very remote area. All you need is an internet connectivity, and you can do that with Starlink or whatever nowadays. Like it's leveling the field, and it's kind of also adding this kind of democratization of healthcare services and access to everything that the science makes available.
And Raj, what the pandemic sort of did was it accelerated things in terms of scale, because like you mentioned, things like telemedicine, R&D practices online, that stuff was happening. It just blew up from the pandemic. So if the pandemic didn't happen, let's say for telemedicine, for example, how long do you think it would have taken telemedicine to get to this point if there wasn't a pandemic? Or even the R&D stuff you're talking about, the fact that you're able to do stuff. How much of an accelerant do you think it was in terms of how it's affected the healthcare industry?
Yeah, my sort of personal take on that is that I think it's driven about a 5x acceleration, right? So I think telemedicine would have gone there in 10 years probably. I think that using remote sensors to drive clinical trials would have probably gone there in about 10 years, right? But I think that it's compressed that cycle to about 2 years now because of COVID, right? So in my opinion, it's been sort of a 5x type of acceleration that I've seen, and I think that's phenomenal, right? For individuals like myself, I'm really happy. I mean, I'm not praying that there's another COVID out there, but if there is another COVID in the future, it actually helps us accelerate some of the work that we've been doing.
You're a very optimistic guy with 10 years. I would have thought more like 20 years, judging by how the lawyers actually influence these decisions. Like, you cannot do this remote because you're going to get sued. So there is a no. With COVID, you had to do it remote. You had no alternative. So you have been forced to go there. And this opened, it's in every bad, there is maybe something really good in there somewhere. And I think the good in there somewhere is this acceleration of transformation, especially in healthcare. It's amazing how many possibilities this thing has opened up in like coming up with new drugs, but also in telemedicine, and all of these things has rethought the entire, also the security, liability. All of these topics have been completely reviewed grounds up. So the amount of transformation that has been done, I would think it shaved probably 20 years from it, which is a great benefit to the society.
Raj, I want to circle back to your definition of digital transformation, because I understand you use the framework of the 40-50-10 model. Can you give us a little more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's often a question that a lot of enterprises face around what type of budget and human resource investment should they be making in digital transformation, and more importantly, what areas of digital transformation should they be investing their resources and budget on? And I use this sort of 40-50-10 model. So I feel that you should invest about 40% of your financial and human resources on new business models, for instance. So by that I mean using digital data and analytics for things like e-commerce. Let's say you're not an e-commerce enabled business. Spend 40% of your resources on enabling e-commerce, because that is a digitally enabled business model, let's say, right? spend 50% of your time and energy on optimizing existing business processes through digital and data and analytics. So this is where you could use artificial intelligence to accelerate drug discovery and drug development. So drug discovery and drug development happens today, so it's an existing business process, but use artificial intelligence, for instance, to accelerate that, or use data to understand the end-to-end visibility of your supply chain, for instance, right? So your supply chain processes exist, but look to optimize that with digital and data analytics. So spend 50% there. And then the other 10%, in my opinion, is around disruption, right? So what sort of moonshot bets can you take? And that's where I would spend sort of 10% of your time or your energy on, to really take those moonshot disruptive bets, which are sort of high risk, but will ultimately potentially be high reward for you as well.
It's a great approach. It quantifies a little bit. Especially the 10% is, many people don't do it. The 10% is like evaluating the potential of new technologies, new techniques, new ways of using technology that is already available to kind of transform your business. And you need to spend some time, some energy in actually doing that, because if you don't do it, you don't test it, you won't get there. So definitely, I think it makes sense, especially the 10%, because what I'm seeing in the industry, where the people that I'm talking to, they do the 40, they do the 50, maybe in slightly different ratios, but some people rarely do the 10%. They rarely do the 10 properly. The part that really allows you to dream, allows you to challenge yourself, allows you to, push the boundaries. So yeah, I totally like this.
And during your breakdown of the 40, 50, 10 model, you mentioned AI, and it's come up a bunch lately on the pod. So I'm curious, how does AI play? What's the role of AI in pharmaceuticals? At Arcutis, how would without getting into company secrets, how does it play into what you're doing in Derm?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me provide a little bit of an industry perspective on that, right? So I think if you think of sort of the pharmaceutical industry in general, it's taken, on average or traditionally, it's taken about 10 to 12 years to take a drug from discovery or ideation to commercialization. And the reason that happens is because the failure rate tends to be about 90%, plus minus, let's say, right? So you discover a drug, you develop a drug, and 90% of those drugs actually never make it to commercial stage because you have the wrong formulation, you have the wrong sort of molecules, you don't find the right patients to enroll in your clinical trials, you have a mismatch between patients that come into your clinical trials versus the ones that are really going to benefit from the drug or have the right outcomes. So there's a multitude of reasons, right? And in my opinion, I think where AI plays a huge role is to compress that cycle from 10 to 12 years to 10 to 12 months, right? And if you look at what has happened with the COVID vaccines, right? We had COVID vaccines out there in about 10 to 12 months, right? And the reason we had COVID vaccines out there in about 10 to 12 months...
Bill Gates wanted to get everyone implanted without...
There was a huge amount of work that was put in to develop these vaccines, but these vaccines were not sort of developed in a lab without sort of the use of technology. And that's where AI came into play, right? So what artificial intelligence allows you to do is really find the right, and I'm not a scientist by any means, but find the right compounds or molecules that you kind of coalesce together and put it together in a way where you have the maximum amount of success, right? So the AI models kind of iterate through this molecule plus this molecule, this compound plus this compound can come together and ensure the best outcome for solving something like COVID, for instance, right? And I think for a human to do that, they have to do a series of experiments in a lab setting. But an AI model can iterate through those experiments in a much faster way which then ultimately means you can accelerate your drug discovery and drug development processes, which ultimately means you can get into the clinical stage or the clinical setting much faster. So that's one application of AI, which is using it for drug discovery or drug development or vaccine discovery or vaccine development. The other sort of use of AI is often you have to find the right patient cohorts to match your drug or your vaccine with, right? So, not everyone has a successful outcome, on your drug or on your vaccine, for instance. So identifying that matching between who's likely to have the best outcome with the drug that you've just discovered or developed, AI facilitates that matching algorithm as well, right? So that's another benefit of AI. And what that does is that helps you accelerate your clinical trials, because you could go into a clinical setting, realize that, my clinical trial just failed because I had the wrong patient cohorts. But if you go into that clinical trial knowing that people with this genetic sequence or this DNA sequence are actually going to have the best outcome on your drug, then you can recruit those patients into your clinical trial and maximize the outcome for those patients.
So we've talked about your formula for digital transformation, a little bit of AI. Let's get into why stuff doesn't work. Why doesn't digital transformation work? As much as it sounds like you've got a pretty good plan in mind, the 40-50-10 model, it sounds really cool, but sometimes you do all that and it doesn't work out the way you want it to. In most cases, why do you think it doesn't?
I think that's a great question. And I think that, historically, actually 70 to 80% of digital transformations have not worked. And I sort of attribute those to a few factors. I think one is not having the right culture. So digital transformation requires a very agile, nimble, and fail fast type of culture. So going into a digital transformation program that not everything is going to work, and you have to have that mindset and that cultural setting in place. So a lot of organizations do not have that culture, want to get it right the first time. They're driving towards perfection. And that doesn't work for sort of a digital transformation. The other sort of element of it, and this is where individuals like Gerry have helped me in the past, is having the right talent and the right expertise, right? So no one company has all of the talent you need for digital transformation. So you need those partnerships. You need to, what I call sort of have those speedboats, right? So, companies like OSF that I worked with previously, they give us those speedboats. They help us sort of accelerate our digital transformation by sort of having the right talent and the right expertise, because no one company actually has that. The other thing that often fails, or is one of the reasons why digital transformations fail, is that you have a lack of measurement, right? How do you measure sort of digital transformation success, right? And this is where sort of agile transformation or agile mindsets come into play quite a bit, because you have to have good sort of measurement in place to make sure that you understand what success is and you're constantly measuring whether you're getting that success or not. And the last sort of reason that I will mention is a lot of digital transformations, and I'm an engineer, so I've been guilty of this throughout my career, is that I love to solve problems, but I don't know if I'm solving the right problem. And engineers like myself often look to find problems for solutions that we've created. I had a call the other day with someone, and they said, well, how can blockchain be used in the pharma or the biotech industry? I think that was the wrong question. I think the question is, what's the problem that something like blockchain can solve for? Or maybe blockchain doesn't need to solve for any problems in the biotech space, right? So I think you have to start with the problem in mind and then put the right solutions behind it. I think often we start with the solution and then no one uses that solution because it's mismatched to the problem. So I think that's why digital transformations fail, in my opinion. Gerry, I don't know if you...
It's a culture of allowing people to fail and not punish them. Like if a digital transformation project didn't go well, if you don't punish them, that would be conductive for more digital transformation. Try again, try something else. And also it's another culture of good enough-ish, because you don't need to make something perfect right from day one. You need to just prove the concept to start with and have a very solid starting point, and then you can iterate and improve it and improve it and improve it. But don't approach digital transformation like a car manufacturing or some kind of a precision manufacturing where you have to really nail down all the small details in the process. That's not it. You really need to have something that is good enough. You have a first really solid good step, and then you can work on it. You can improve it. You will also have metrics in the process. While you are iterating through it, you have a better understanding of the challenges. You have the better understanding of how you can measure it, how you can define success. So, but having this culture of allowing people to fail, allowing people to make really risky bets is very important, and then don't push them to come up with the perfect solution, because it's not going to happen, and especially when you are pushing the limits.
I know Arcutis calls itself a data-driven company, and I've heard you talk about how data is driving company culture. To me, as a layperson, I'm like, data and company, that doesn't make any sense. So how does data drive company culture at Arcutis?
The biggest way in which data drives company culture is, if you think about decision making, a lot of decisions are often made in the absence of data, and that introduces subjectivity into decision making, right? So to give you an example, I mean, there's been a whole debate about whether we should ask people to be vaccinated or not vaccinated to show up to work, right? There's been a whole debate about it. And the way we addressed that debate was we were very data driven. We said, look, here's the data that's in front of us. Here's sort of what the scientific community is telling us. Vaccines have a positive effect on individuals. So we made a decision about whether we require individuals to be vaccinated or not, at least for the initial phases of COVID, based on the data that we were seeing. And for any pharmaceutical company, you have to be data-driven. I mean, ultimately, you're running clinical trials, and clinical trials produce a huge amount of data at the end of the day. They produce data about the efficacy profile and the safety profile of your drug, of your cream, of your vaccine, whatever you're trying to produce. And if you're not data-driven, you can't really launch a drug, in my opinion. Like, how are you going to tell people that your drug has the right safety profile? How are you going to tell individuals that your drug has the right efficacy profile, right? So I think that's part of the DNA of any pharmaceutical company, and it's definitely part of our DNA. And I think this point that I made earlier about measuring digital transformation or being very measurement focused, measurement is about being data driven, right? So if you can't measure things, how do you know that you're being successful? So I think that's innate in how you need to be data-driven.
And also, when you're talking about a data-driven culture, like what we tried at OSF is to be super objective when we are appraising someone's performance. Like, try to remove as much as possible the "I like you, he's a great guy or girl" or whatever. I like you, the color of your eyes, or I like what you are eating, therefore I'm gonna give you a better appraisal. Try to make it very objective, very results driven, very data driven, because that's results driven. Being objective, that's data, because you have 10,000 data points around the person everywhere. So taking that and making sense of it and making it into something that can be used also in your culture, I think it's helping a lot. And by the way, technology and everything in digital allows you to do that now more and more. In the past, you were just making a decision based on your gut feel. Now you don't have to use that gut feel as much, and you can rely much more on data to kind of rely on something more solid.
Raj, I heard you in an interview say once that you embed data into every decision you make. Now, is it always about data? I mean, like what Gerry was talking about. I mean, sometimes guts not a bad thing, because especially if you're coming from experience, that's not essentially a gut experience, a gut reaction or gut decision. It's based on experience. So how do you break that away from your engineering mind of using some of that gut, because you do have all these years of experience? It's not just always about the data.
Yeah, so I would argue, Joe, that gut is part of the data, right? I mean, in a way, if you sort of think about your experience, that experience is a data point for you, and you're using that to sort of drive, decision making.
Pattern recognition.
Yeah, and I want to go back to what Gerry said. He said, now with a lot of digital, we have access to more and more data. I think, marketeers used to previously say that, 50% of my marketing budget works. I just don't know which 50% actually works, right? So what digital and targeted marketing and a lot of that has done for us, now we have all the data, right? And we know which 50% works and which 50% doesn't work, right? Yes, you still have sort of gut that you have to apply. I mean, there's a lot of experience that comes into it, but I think of experience as a data point, right? Ultimately, that's another data point that you use to make your decision. And clearly, if you use the gut and you use all of the other facts or data or information that's in front of you, I think you'll actually arrive at the best decision.
I guess it's never really black or white. It's not really to the extremes. You obviously sometimes you just need to use your gut feel just because you don't have data or you cannot interpret data and the data doesn't cover everything. That's where the art part of management comes in. You need to make a judgment call. But having more data, more coverage with data to give you something to be able to measure culture, measure people, measure whatever, measure. You cannot manage something that you cannot measure, basically. But it's not black or white. You can have 60% coverage, 70% coverage. Sometimes, especially when you do projects that are crazy or pushing the boundaries, you can have just 10% coverage or 20% coverage. That doesn't mean that you have to stop just because you don't have data. It means that maybe you have to try harder to acquire better data and better metrics. But you can still do things even in absence of those things, and understand when it's appropriate and how do you balance these things out. So, but yeah, I think data is definitely important in this conversation.
Yeah, and I think, Gerry, to your point, the absence of data actually is interesting data in and of itself, right? So when I run surveys, for instance, within my current organization or previous organization, and certain people don't respond to the surveys, for instance, right? Let's say you have a 50% response rate or a 60% response rate. You have to ask yourself the question, why didn't the other 50 or 40% respond, right? And there's some insight to be gained in the absence of data. And I think you have to understand that as a data point as well.
Very good point. Absence of data, sometimes you really need to raise a red flag and to understand, hey, what's happening here?
Yeah.
All right, so we've got the framework for digital transformation. We've got the data. So how do we pull it off in real time? Talk to me about the importance of having evangelists on your team to help push the mission of digital transformation.
I personally, digital transformation has a lot to do with culture. Ultimately, you want a digitally enabled organization, and you want to have digital permeate through your organization. And no single person can actually do that, right? So part of my role is to create those evangelists. I think if you actually watch videos from Simon Sinek, he says that if you can inspire 18% of the organization to drive your change forward, then those individuals will actually inspire the rest of the organization to drive the change forward, right? It's all about finding that 18%, and if you find the right 18%, then they'll drive the change forward. So, I don't believe that any single person can drive change forward. It has to be a very federated model. You have to empower other individuals within the organization to drive that change forward. And part of my role is to find those evangelists, find those ambassadors within the organization that are going to drive that change forward. And I think if you find the right individuals that will carry the torch within their functional areas, within their teams, I think that's the faster and quicker way to make change happen, right? I think there's an amazing African saying that goes, if you want to drive change the fastest, get others on that journey with you, right? I forget how it actually goes, but I think that's important. I think it's getting others to be part of that change journey, and finding those right evangelists or those right ambassadors is part of the success for any organization.
It feels like you read my book. I have a chapter talking exactly about this topic, like having ambassadors both within your company and outside your company that can drive these kind of changes, that can drive new ideas, the transformational projects. Bringing people with you, I think it's the only way you can drive these changes. Especially the more ambitious they are, the more transformative they are, the more support you need from all these ambassadors.
And so on the human element, Gerry, and what you're talking about in the book, how do you identify these ambassadors slash evangelists? Is there, again, this is not something a computer can do or some sort of AI. This is where the human factor gets involved. How do you identify those people?
From my experience, what I would always do, I'm always very transparent with what I'm trying to accomplish. And I'm sharing my ideas, I'm talking to everybody, I'm trying to challenge everybody. And some people raise their hand. Some people are interested in these things, in these topics, and they raise their hand and say, okay, now I noticed you, I'm gonna bring you in, and then you give them something to do. Well, not always everybody that raises their hand actually engage with you further, but some do. And the ones that do still engage even after they raise their hand, those are the ones that you will work with as ambassadors. And it's you don't have to overthink it that much. Sometimes it's as simple as talking to people and sharing with them, hey, this is what I want to accomplish. What do you think? You like it? You don't like it? What is your opinion about it? And it flows naturally. And you can do that in a one-on-one setting, but you can also do it company-wide. What we do and what I do is kind of these town halls where I'm sharing ideas, where I'm sharing challenges and everything. And people raise their hand, they say they are interested, so they join. And it's kind of organically pushed throughout the organization. I don't know about you, Raj, but this worked quite well for me.
Yeah, I think the organic way is definitely one of the ways. I think if you I think the other way is to get people almost to apply for the position to be an ambassador, and I think you get very interesting filtering happening there, right? So, and it doesn't have to be a very complicated process to apply for it. It's a simple half a page type of thing, which is to say, why do you think you are the right ambassador or the right evangelist to carry this digital transformation forward? And you'll see the individuals that are actually really passionate about this sort of put their hands up, to your point, apply for the job of, and this is almost a little bit of a fictitious job, right? But to apply to be ambassadors or to apply to be evangelists, and then other people are not going to apply, and you'll actually filter those individuals out. So you'll get the true sort of passionate individuals to actually carry the torch forward then.
Earlier, we described you as an engineer with heart, Raj, and to show, and proof of that is you're involved in something called the I Am Remarkable campaign. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I got involved with I Am Remarkable. It's a Google campaign. I got involved with them about 3 years ago. And one of the things that struck me was I worked with many organizations. I think L'Oreal was an exception in sort of my early days, where I hadn't seen enough sort of underrepresented groups or female leaders sort of get to the top of the organization. And I heard about I Am Remarkable as a way to build self-advocacy and self-promotion skills within females, within the organization, or help underrepresented groups build those self-advocacy and self-promotion skills as well. And I think I had a big aha moment. I was hiring about 30 data engineers in India about 3 to 4 years ago, and I put a lot of job postings out there, and I got very few females applying for it. And I kind of paused and I said, why is that happening? And it was happening because I was asking for 4 very specific technology skills on the job posting, and men tend to apply, even if they have 1 out of those 4 skills, they will apply for it. Whereas females, they feel they need to have all 4 skills to apply for that role. And that got me to pause a little bit, because it got me to realize, and then I did a little bit of research on it, is that men tend to self-promote and self-advocate for themselves a lot better than females in underrepresented groups in the workplace. And what this Google campaign about I Am Remarkable does is it helps build this muscle around self-promotion and self-advocacy in the workplace. So I became a facilitator for it. I've run a few workshops on it. There's about 4,000 facilitators now globally that Google has actually trained, and I think it's truly a fabulous, remarkable program because it really builds this skill around self-promotion and self-advocacy, which I think is very important to help get females and to help get underrepresented groups to really get recognized within organizations.
Lastly, we quoted African proverbs during this conversation, Albert Einstein, but I'm going to quote you because I heard you on a podcast a while back where you talked about generating the future faster. How do we do that? How do we get to the future faster?
Yeah, I think it all boils down to culture for me. I think culture is at the middle of how you generate the future faster. I think it starts with being, as I said earlier, being customer obsessed or patient obsessed or consumer obsessed. I think you really have to understand what the patient wants, what the customer wants, what the consumer wants. I think it has to do with this notion of building a learning culture within an organization. And none of us are perfect. I'm far from it. But what I commit to every day is to get better today than I was yesterday. And I'm continuously learning. And I think building a learning culture within an organization that says, what did we do good in our last period and what are we going to do better going forward? What have we learned from our mistakes over the last month, the last sprint, or the last quarter, let's say? And I think it's that learning culture that is so important to really generate the future faster, because we have to learn from what we do well. We have to learn from what we do not do well, and I think improve upon ourselves. And through that constant improvement, I actually think we will get to the future a lot faster than we have been previously.
You remember, Joe, we had a podcast a few months ago. I think Madeline said having a culture of why not and then what else. It kind of summarized it pretty well in a few words, like you really need to push ruthlessly towards why not. Let's try it. Let's push it. Let's reimagine. Let's dream. And then what else can I do? What else can I do? And I think that's a very strong mindset that can bring the future faster to us. And you need to be ruthless about it, because otherwise change is tough. Change is difficult. People don't like to change. And I'm including myself very much into this. If you want to accomplish change, you need to take yourself outside of the comfort zone. You need to be pushing yourself hard. You need to really, really go against the common wisdom. And that's how you get the future faster, in my opinion.
Hey, Gerry, before we go, we're recording this podcast while Elon Musk is tearing down Twitter to the studs. And it doesn't look like culture is a priority there. So as someone who, I know you're a fan of Elon Musk's work, but when you see what he's doing over there at Twitter, does it, like, as someone who's a founder, CEO, someone who manages people, are you like, Elon, what are you doing over there? How are you taking in all the stuff that we're seeing in the media about how he's handling Twitter?
You're trying to make me say something controversial here, right?
No. I just want to know what your thoughts are.
But Joe, honestly, it's not because you do 1, 2, 3 really well that number 4 has to also be really great. Okay? You can be a very smart person and say stupid things. It is possible. It is possible. I know people that are super smart and they are generally really good in some areas, and in some areas are really stupid. Well, Elon Musk, he should hire himself somebody to stop him talking. Really, stop him talking, take away his Twitter account, because he's really not good with that. Communicating is not his thing. Just take his cell phone away. I think that would help him a lot, because the guy is a smart guy. He disrupted a couple of industries and has a lot to offer. But when you come out and you say willy-nilly stuff that makes no sense, that makes your shares go down by 10% or 5% or whatever. By the way, I don't know if you know, but you have pension funds investing in Tesla. Okay? That means people like you and me, or whatever, regular Joes, right? it matches really nicely. But you know that count on those gains or those capital gains made through Tesla or through any other companies. Like as a CEO, you have to be mindful of that. It's not just your company. You have many stakeholders in the company. You have your investors, you have your employees, you have the society around you. You really have to be mindful. And I don't believe this crap, sorry that I have to use the word, but this crap about you being real. What does it mean, real? Like speaking without filter, saying stupid crap, it doesn't make you real. It just makes you stupid. You know, you have to take a pause, take a deep breath, think about what you want to say, and then say it. And in a sense, also like, for me, it was a kind of like a awakening in my personal life. Like my wife, because, you know, I'm without filter with my wife, has told me like a few times, hey, you really need to talk to me like the way you talk to one of your employees. Because with them, you are mindful, you filter things out. With me, you're not even thinking things through, and you're just telling me whatever. I mean, and that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Why? Because it's always better when you're thinking a little bit before you just open your mouth and just blah, whatever. You know, and that's Elon. Someone who is very smart, has a lot of things to offer, but when he opens his mouth and he's really not thinking things through, it just doesn't make any sense. You know, so that's my opinion about Elon, and I love the guy. I like what he's doing and everything. I'm using examples of his work all the time, but you know, it's not all black and white. You know, it's not all peaches. He's doing stuff that I don't like. I hate.
Yeah, and I think, Gerry, to your point, there's a difference, or there's a different playbook between how you run a startup and how you run a mature company. And I think, in my opinion, I think what Elon hasn't gone right yet, and I think this needs to be the learning for him, is that he's applying a startup playbook that he got from SpaceX and Tesla to a mature company like Twitter. And I think those are two different playbooks. Those are companies at very different stages of maturity. You know, I think how you think about running a startup is very different than how you think about running a very mature company like Twitter. And I think that situational leadership, that situational context, I think is missing in how he's approached Twitter. And I'm quite sad to see that, because I think Twitter, it has a amazing set of employees. I think it has an amazing culture. I think it's an amazing platform with huge engagement and all of that good stuff, right? So I think where it's headed, in my opinion, I think is a lack of application of situational leadership.
Yeah, I mean, even the declarations that he made, today he's buying Twitter, tomorrow he's no longer buying Twitter, the stock prices go up and down, it's like a roller coaster and everything. There are actual people who invested in those stocks. People like you and me and again, pension funds. You cannot just do that. It's not a game. This is not playing around. This is serious stuff. I mean, you're affecting people's life. You need to have some degree of responsibility. I'm not saying that you cannot be pushing the boundaries and pushing the limits and everything, but I think there is a better way, a more respectful way of doing this. You know, nobody is asking you to say stuff that you don't believe in or lie or whatever, but still there is a way to do it. There is a form to do it, because again, you're affecting people's life.
All right, well, let's wrap that up, because I don't want you to get into more controversial topics. We were just going to start talking about U.S. election processes. We ran out of time. Raj, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you as well. And
thank you. Good to see you. Yeah.
That's Rajvir Madan, the SVP and Chief Digital and Information Technology Officer at Arcutis Biotherapeutics. Connect with Raj on LinkedIn and find out more about his company at arcutis.com. This has been The Great Digital Transformation with Gerard Zatvani. To participate in the conversation, go to gerardzatvani.com. The Great Digital Transformation is a production of Forbes Books.